Fair enough.
What did you think of our conversation with Damodaran?
I thought one of the most interesting things he said was that the thing he's most focused on this year, from a valuation perspective, is the elections. And what he said was that the elections will drive the market this year more than people think they will. I think we do a really good job of avoiding politics on this podcast. I think we're generally pretty apolitical, or at least we try to be. But I'm thinking now that maybe this year we should actually be incorporating politics more into this podcast and more into our analysis than we have done in the past. Because it's possible that in our mission to avoid politics, we actually might be creating some blind spots for ourselves. And the reality he points out with those comments is actually markets and politics are intrinsically linked.
So inflation, my understanding is that it was shelter costs that were the largest contributor to the uptick, and everyone freaked out, and the market, I think, was down 400 points or something because they thought maybe those rate cuts, the punch bowl won't be back as soon as we'd hoped. The only thing we know, the best contraindicator in history is survey economists, and if they all agree on something, go the other way. 100% of economists, and they'd never had total unanimity around anything, predicted a recession for 2023, and guess what? It never showed up. And in this instance, they've been talking about, is it 3 cuts or is it 5 cuts? And, the only thing we know is it's not going to be what they predict. And the market just freaked out when it was like, our date is off with a rate cut, or our date might be off with a rate cut. But when I looked into the data, it didn't really look as if inflation was spiking. Carl Icahn, what struck me is $200 million isn't a lot of money. Carl did something interesting a few years ago. He returned every investor's money and said, I'm sick of managing other people's money. I'm just going to do my own. But $200 million, unless it was Carl Icahn, probably wouldn't get much news. That's not a large investment. JetBlue, I'm fascinated by this. I think JetBlue is a great brand. I think they're the best product in the domestic market. As you know, I fly a lot. And the stock has been a real underperformer. The merger got called off, and then boom, he comes in 22%. I mean, this is a classic activist play. I'd be curious to know, and I don't know if you've read his deck, what does he think they need to be doing that they're not doing?
Yeah, he hasn't said anything about this, and so that we can only speculate. All he's done is submitted the filing, and he said it's an attractive investment, but he hasn't said anything about strategy or what he plans to do.
And then he convinced a bunch of creditors to loan him a shit ton of money. He then made distributions to himself. So he made a ton of money, took his money off the table. A lot of times private equity will go in and buy a company, create some operational efficiencies. Maybe it does a little better the next year. And the first thing they do is they go and they issue a ton of debt and they take their money out again. So anything that happens from that point forward, they've either gotten all their money out or they've already made money. And so it's kind of financial engineering. And a lot of people think these companies just come in, pile it up with debt, take their money out, and then put the company under huge strain. Sometimes reduce the pensions, don't invest, whatever it might be. That's the argument against private equity, that they come in and they basically suck the corpus dry, they feed on it, and then they move on to the next corpus and leave just kind of the wreckage behind them.
Which feels fair for this situation, for the TWA situation.
I mean, there's instances where private equity comes in and literally ruins a company, but the difference here with JetBlue is that he doesn't have a control stake. And even if he gets a board seat, they're not going to let him just lever up the company and walk away with his back. They're not going to do that.